My name is Walter Thompson. I'm 78 years old, and I used to believe that the bonds of family, though stretched thin by time, never truly broke. I was wrong. When my wife, Linda, passed away 3 years ago, it felt like someone had taken a wrench to my chest and twisted until everything inside me cracked. 47 years of marriage, buried in a box under a tree. She once called her favorite place in the world. I remember the way she used to smile when the light hit that tree in the fall, orange and gold dancing through the branches like fire from heaven. She was the fire in my life, and when she was gone, the world went cold. I stayed in our house, the same two-story home we built together in the early 70s, right here in a quiet Pennsylvania town where everyone knew each other's name. I kept the garden alive because she loved daisies and planted them near the front porch. I kept her rocking chair on the patio, just where she left it. Some mornings I'd sit in my chair beside it and swear I could still hear the way she used to hum to herself, a soft tune that didn't belong to any song I could ever name. That hum is burned into my memory like sunlight through curtains. Life after Linda was quiet, but not unbearable. I had my routines. I'd get up at 6 every morning, make a cup of black coffee, read the paper, and then tinker in the garage for a few hours. I'm a retired mechanic. Old habits die hard. The smell of oil and the sound of metal always gave me comfort. I still had my old Chevy pickup parked in the driveway. Needed a new belt, but she still ran, just like me. A little creaky in the morning, but still moving. My son Greg would stop by maybe once a month, sometimes less. Always busy, always rushing. He worked in real estate, selling houses to folks looking for more space or fewer neighbors, or whatever excuse people use these days to chase something newer. I never really understood what he was chasing. He was a bright kid growing up, got good grades, had a natural charm to him. Linda used to say he could talk the stars out of the sky if he tried. But somewhere along the line, that charm started feeling more like a suit he wore to get what he wanted. He married Lisa in his early 30s. She was always polite to me, but not warm. Her smile was too tight. Her eyes always moved around too fast, like she was scanning for something. Whenever they visited, I could feel her looking around my home like it was an asset rather than a memory. I should have seen it coming. Maybe part of me did. Maybe that's why I'd started to get my paperwork in order months before they ever showed up that Friday morning. It was early April. I remember because the trees out front had just started to bloom again, and for a moment it felt like life was giving me something back. The air was cool, the sky was clear, and I had just finished trimming the hedges when I heard a car door slam. I turned around, wiping my hands on an old rag, and saw Greg and Lisa walking up the driveway. Both smiling, both dressed too well for a casual visit. Lisa had a manila folder in her hand. Greg put a hand on my shoulder and told me they'd been thinking a lot about my health, about my future, and that they'd made a decision. That's the word he used. Decision. Not suggestion, not idea. Decision. They had already arranged for me to move into a care facility outside town. A nice one, Greg said. Quiet, safe, full of other folks my age. Lisa chimed in about how it had a community garden and weekly movie nights. Like that was supposed to sweeten the blow. I asked them what the hell they were talking about. I wasn't sick. I wasn't frail. I wasn't asking for help. But they weren't listening. They never were. Before I could protest, I saw a moving van pull up to the curb. 3 strangers stepped out, already pulling boxes from the truck. Greg handed them a list and gestured toward the front door like it was his own damn house. Lisa slipped the folder into my hands. It was filled with printed documents. Contracts, transfer forms, power of attorney agreements. I hadn't signed a single thing, but they were all dated and neatly tabbed. Greg told me not to worry, that it was all taken care of. He'd hired an attorney. Lisa said they were only thinking about what was best for me, that I'd be safer there, that the house was too much for someone my age. I stood there, heart pounding, watching these strangers box up pieces of my life like they were cleaning out a motel room. I tried to speak, to shout, to tell them to stop, but the words caught in my throat. Linda's favorite vase, wrapped in newspaper. The photo of her and I on our wedding day, laid flat in a box labeled miscellaneous. My toolbox, the same one I'd used to build the damn kitchen cabinets with my own hands, being lugged away like junk. I felt dizzy. I felt old in a way I never had before, not because of my body, but because my voice meant nothing anymore. Greg walked me to the car like I was some fragile package he was delivering. I stared at the house one last time as we drove off. The white shutters, the bird bath Linda painted, the worn path from the front door to the mailbox. I imagined her standing in the window, arms crossed, watching me leave. I imagined what she would have said if she were still alive. I think she would have screamed. They took me to the home, a place 2 towns over, tucked behind a long driveway and surrounded by trimmed hedges and generic landscaping. A smiling receptionist greeted us with a clipboard. Greg signed something while I just stood there, numb. A nurse came over and took my arm, gently guiding me toward a room at the end of the hall. It smelled like bleach and oatmeal. The walls were beige, the bed was too low. A single window faced a parking lot. Greg patted me on the shoulder one last time and said, "You'll be comfortable here, Dad. Don't worry about anything. Lisa and I will handle everything." Then they were gone. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my hands. I'd built an entire life with these hands, fixed cars, raised a family, buried my wife, and now they shook with rage. Not because they put me in a nursing home, not because I was surrounded by strangers, but because they never asked. They never looked me in the eye and asked what I wanted. They took my keys, my home, and my dignity in one breathless, smiling afternoon. And as the door closed behind me and the room fell silent, I knew something they didn't. I wasn't done yet. That thought sat in my chest like a coal refusing to burn out. The walls of that nursing home were quiet, but not peaceful. It was the quiet of things forgotten, the kind of silence that wraps around your throat at night when the lights go off and all that's left are memories clawing through the dark. My room had a dresser, a stiff mattress, and a call button. A floral curtain hung next to a window that looked out on nothing but the side of a storage shed. I stared out of it for hours that first night, wondering how long it would take before I stopped being angry. The answer was never. You don't just stop being angry when your life is stolen. You carry it in your gut like a stone, and it gets heavier the more people tell you it's for your own good. The staff were kind enough, but I wasn't fooled. To them, I was just another old man with stiff knees and fading eyes. They called me Mr. Thompson, asked about my meds, brought me lukewarm soup and apple slices. They didn't ask who I was before the wrinkles, before the cane, before the silence. Nobody did. Greg didn't visit. Neither did Lisa. A week went by. Then another. I heard nothing. No calls, no messages, no letters. I asked the nurse if my son had left my phone or anything from my house. She said there was a small box of belongings in the closet. I opened it and found a pair of slippers, a comb, and an old flannel shirt that didn't even smell like home anymore. Not a single photo. Not one reminder of Linda. Just things that could be packed quickly without thought. I spent my mornings sitting by the window, pretending the sky was something worth watching. I watched a woman down the hall cry into her hands every morning at breakfast. I watched a man named Harold stare at the same chessboard every afternoon, waiting for someone who never came. I was surrounded by people who had been tucked away like old shoes in the back of a closet. Kept, but never worn again. And then, one evening, everything changed. I was in the rec room, pretending to do a puzzle no one cared to finish. The nurse had wheeled in a television for movie night. The other residents had gathered around with styrofoam cups of cocoa, their eyes dull and expectant. I wasn't watching the movie, I was watching the clock. And just as the hands hit 7, I heard my name. "Yeah, Walter Thompson. That's my father-in-law." I turned. Greg's voice. He wasn't in the room, but I could hear him clear as day from the nurse's station around the corner. The door was slightly ajar. I heard Lisa's voice too, quieter, clipped like she was trying not to be overheard. "He won't cause any trouble. He's cooperative," Greg said. "We just need the paperwork finalized before the appraisal." "Appraisal?" "He signed over everything," Lisa added. "House, car, accounts. It's all cleaned up. Once the sale goes through, we'll finally have enough for the down payment on the new property." There was a pause, followed by a laugh I hadn't heard from Greg in years. The kind of smug laugh that doesn't belong to the boy I raised. It belonged to someone colder. I mean, he's not gonna live forever. May as well make the best of it. The nurse laughed nervously. "Well, as long as he's happy here, he doesn't need to be happy. He just needs to stay put." That last sentence shattered something in me I didn't even know was still whole. I stood there behind the rec room doorway, fists clenched at my sides, heart thumping like a war drum in my chest. They didn't just put me away, they erased me. Sold the house, took the car, cleared out the savings, all for a down payment. I wasn't a father. I was a stepping stone. I went back to my room without finishing the puzzle. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the edge of the bed, hands trembling. Not from age, but fury. The kind of fury that makes men young again. I stared at the single drawer in the nightstand and pulled out the only thing of value inside. A notepad and a pen. I began writing. I wrote names. I wrote dates. I wrote every single memory that tied me to that house, that life, that woman I loved. I wrote down the day I paid off the mortgage, the day Linda planted the first tree in the yard, the day we brought Greg home, wrapped in a blue blanket. Every scrap of proof that I had built that life with my own 2 hands. And then I wrote a plan. They thought I was powerless. They thought that by stripping me of my belongings, my home, and my independence, I would go quiet, shrink, disappear. They didn't realize I still had one thing they couldn't steal. Time, and time, when wielded with enough focus, can become a weapon. The next morning, I requested to see the director of the facility. Her name was Denise, mid-50s, sharp eyes, no-nonsense attitude. I told her I believed my legal documents had been altered without my consent. She seemed skeptical at first, but when I showed her a list of account numbers, signatures, and dates, I still remembered by heart, she started listening. I asked if they had legal aid, or if I could place a call to a local elder protection attorney. She said she'd look into it. Later that afternoon, I used the phone in her office to call someone I hadn't spoken to in years. My brother-in-law, Michael. He and I had drifted after Linda died. He moved out west to Oregon, remarried, started over. But we had history. He loved Linda like a sister. And when I told him everything, his voice went quiet. "You want me to fly out there?" he asked. "No, I want you to get me a lawyer." By the end of the week, I had one. Her name was Maria Calderon. Young, smart, with the kind of face that didn't smile much unless she meant it. She came to the facility with a briefcase and a recorder. We sat in the common room while I laid out everything. What they did, what I heard, what I knew in my bones had been stolen from me. She nodded, took notes, and then said something I hadn't heard in a long time. "You still have rights, Mr. Thompson. You still matter." That was the first time since Linda died that I felt like someone saw me, not as a patient, not as a burden, but as a man. Maria began digging, and what she found lit a fire under everything. The house had been transferred using a forged durable power of attorney. The bank accounts had been cleared using online access Greg didn't legally have. My car had been sold using a title Lisa signed on my behalf. They'd done it all fast, quiet, and dirty. But not quiet enough. They had left a trail, and I was going to make damn sure they paid for it. I wasn't sure how yet, but I knew this much. What Greg and Lisa thought was their victory was about to become their reckoning. Because the man they buried in that nursing home, he was waking up. I never thought I'd live to see the day I'd be fighting a war from inside a nursing home. But there I was, old, gray, and forgotten, becoming a general in a battle no one else even knew was happening. I'd never held a sword, but I'd built my life with my bare hands, and I knew how to protect what mattered. Maria was relentless. After only a week, she found enough discrepancies in the signatures and documentation to file a legal motion on my behalf. She said the first step was to freeze any further financial activity on the accounts Greg had drained. The second was to report suspected elder financial abuse to Adult Protective Services and the local sheriff. I nodded, and though my body felt weak, my soul stirred with purpose. But even that wasn't enough for me. I wanted more than legal justice. I wanted them to feel what I felt, the betrayal, the isolation, the shame. I wanted them to understand what it meant to be discarded like garbage. But I couldn't yell. I couldn't fight them with fists or fury. I had to fight them with silence and patience. I had to become someone they never imagined I could be. So I started gathering more evidence. Denise, the facility director, arranged for me to have limited access to a computer in her office. Under supervision, sure, but she gave me enough time to write and dig. I emailed my old financial advisor, a man named Carter, who had helped me plan my retirement. I asked for all historical statements, checking, savings, property tax history, everything. I told Carter everything. He remembered me well. He had met Linda. He remembered how meticulous I was about paperwork. He agreed to help. Within days, he sent a full record of all my financial transactions for the last 5 years. And that's when the full scope of the theft came into view. Greg had accessed my accounts almost a year before they locked me in this place. Quiet withdrawals, transfers masked as routine expenses. They were already bleeding me before the nursing home even happened. They weren't just impulsive. They were calculating. They were counting on me being too tired, too lost, too old to notice. But I noticed. And I wasn't the only one. Michael, my brother-in-law, flew in from Oregon without warning. He walked into the nursing home with a slow gait and a serious face, carrying a manila envelope under his arm. He had documents, photocopies of texts Lisa had sent to her sister, bragging about finally getting rid of the old man. A photo of Greg posing with a realtor in front of a sold sign that had once stood on my lawn. I looked at that picture for a long time. I memorized every detail of Greg's smile. Not the smile I knew from when he was a boy. This was something else. A smile of conquest. A smile that said, I won. He didn't win. Not yet. Maria filed a motion in court to nullify the property transfer. Because the power of attorney used to sign over the house had been forged, it was legally worthless. And because the car had been sold without proper verification of identity, that transaction could also be reversed. She was already working on freezing the funds Lisa had rerouted into her name, something she didn't think I'd ever discover. But I still hadn't told them. Greg and Lisa had no idea I was building a case. No idea I had an attorney. No idea I knew every lie, every theft, every step they'd taken. Because I needed them to think they were still winning. I needed them arrogant, careless, comfortable. So I waited. And then came the day I requested a supervised visit. I asked Denise to invite my son and daughter-in-law under the pretense of discussing my long-term care plan. She scheduled it for the following week, and I spent every single night between then and now preparing. I laid out photos of Linda on the desk. I brushed my hair. I shaved. I put on the flannel shirt they had stuffed into my belongings, the one that still smelled a little like sawdust and pine. I looked at myself in the mirror and said out loud, "Don't lose your temper." They arrived at 2:14 p.m. Lisa walked in first. She wore sunglasses and a fake smile. Greg came in behind her, looking like he had better things to do. "Hey, Dad," Greg said casually, like we hadn't spoken in weeks. "You doing okay?" I just nodded. "Sit down." They exchanged a glance, like they weren't sure what to expect. Denise sat in the corner, clipboard in hand. Maria entered 2 minutes later, placing a thick binder on the table without saying a word. Her eyes were cold and steady. "What's going on?" Lisa asked, looking uneasy for the first time. Maria turned to me. "Would you like to explain, Mr. Thompson?" I looked at my son, my only child, and for a moment, my throat tightened. I remembered holding him as a newborn, teaching him how to ride a bike, sitting at his high school graduation. I remembered the way Linda used to whisper, "He's got your eyes," when he was asleep. And then I remembered the voice that said, "He doesn't need to be happy. He just needs to stay put." So I spoke. "I know what you did." Greg flinched slightly. Lisa straightened in her chair. "You used me. Took my house, my car, my money. You sold everything Linda and I built. You didn't even leave me a photograph. You put me in a place to die so you could buy your dream home." Greg opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. "I'm not finished." Maria slid the binder across the table. Inside are bank statements, transfer logs, text message screenshots, and forged legal documents. We've already submitted these to the district attorney's office. Lisa's face drained of color. "You're being investigated for elder financial abuse and fraud," Maria continued. "The property sale has been contested. The funds are frozen. You are both liable for criminal prosecution." Greg stood up suddenly. "You can't do this." Maria didn't even blink. "Actually, we already did." He turned to me, eyes burning. "Dad, you don't understand." I stood up. That shocked him. He hadn't seen me on my feet in months. But I rose slowly, deliberately, with every ounce of dignity I had left. "No," I said. "You don't understand. You threw me away. You thought I wouldn't fight, that I couldn't. But I may be old, Greg. I may be tired, but I am still your father. And I didn't raise you to be this." Silent. Lisa looked down at her hands. Greg's mouth opened, then closed again. Denise quietly ushered them out of the room. I stood there for a long time after the door shut, breathing deep, heart pounding. Maria finally looked at me. "You okay?" I nodded. "Not yet, but I will be." That night I sat by the window and finally saw the stars. They hadn't changed. Still glowing, still distant, still constant. Just like Linda used to say, they're always there, even when you can't see them. And I wasn't done yet. The days after the confrontation were quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't bring peace, but suspense. Like the air before a storm that knows it still has to rage. Denise said Greg and Lisa left without saying a word to the staff. Not even a goodbye. Not even a curse. But the silence told me something. They were scared. Not of me, not really. They were scared of the truth finally catching up. Scared of consequences. Scared of losing what they stole. For the first time since they shoved me into this place, I felt like I was standing upright again, even if my bones still ached and my hands still trembled. Maria kept moving swiftly. The courts had ordered an emergency injunction, preventing any further transactions on the house and freezing the secondary account Lisa had opened under her name. The DA's office assigned an investigator. Greg's name was now part of an active fraud case. Suddenly, the whispers in their new neighborhood weren't about how fortunate they were to upgrade homes. It was about what they had done to get it. But it wasn't enough for me. Justice is fine. Legal revenge is neat and clinical, but what I needed, what my heart begged for, was something more personal, something that didn't just stop them, but showed them, something that cracked them open, like they cracked me. So I went looking for the last thing they had truly forgotten: family. Greg hadn't spoken to his cousin Jenny in years. She was Linda's niece, and she adored her aunt. When Jenny found out what happened, she drove straight from Kansas to see me. She cried the moment she stepped into the room, clutching a photo of her and Linda from a 4th of July picnic years ago. We talked for hours, laughed, mourned. She told me she still remembered how Linda's pie tasted, how she always wore sun hats, and how she used to say, "You can't outrun your conscience. It'll catch you when you're still." Jenny agreed to help with something I'd been working on behind the scenes. See, what Greg didn't know was that I'd never fully trusted his judgment around money. Years ago, before Linda passed, I set up a backup trust fund. Buried beneath paperwork and closed under a sealed family trustee clause. It wasn't huge, but it was enough. Enough to be useful. Enough to send a message. Jenny was the alternate trustee, and the clause was clear. In the event that Greg was ever found to have committed financial abuse, the trust would be rerouted toward charitable causes in Linda's name and any remaining blood relatives who had not participated in misconduct. Greg was written out the moment he acted. I told Jenny it was time. She helped move the funds into a new scholarship program, a small but powerful foundation called the Linda May Honor Grant, aimed at helping women over 60 go back to school or start a business. We announced it in the local paper, a public press release complete with a photo of me, Linda, and Jenny from 20 years ago, smiling in our backyard, the sun dripping through the oak leaves. Greg saw it. I know he did, because 2 days later, he showed up at the nursing home again. No appointment, no call, just walked right through the doors, red in the face, eyes wide, breathing heavy, like a man who had just been chased by all his demons. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He just sat in front of me and said, "Why are you doing this?" I stared at him, and for the first time in months, I saw my son, not the stranger with the fake smiles, not the thief who stood at my fireplace and signed away my life. I saw the boy who used to hold my hand in the supermarket, the teenager who used to ask me how to shave, the man who used to call me for advice when Lisa gave him the silent treatment. But that version of him had died somewhere along the way. And the man in front of me now? He buried the body. "I'm not doing anything," I said. "You did this. You made choices, and now you have to live with them." He leaned forward, eyes pleading. "We were drowning, Dad. We didn't know what else to do." That hit hard. Drowning. You don't steal a life raft by sinking the person who built it. I didn't answer him right away. I just looked at his hands. The same hands that used to hold mine when we crossed the street. The same hands that forged my signature. That sold my house. That pocketed my past like loose change. I finally said, "If you were drowning, you could have reached out. I would have helped. I always would have helped. But you didn't want help. You wanted control." He didn't argue. He just sat there, like a man who finally realized the walls were closing in, like a man who realized he'd burned the last bridge and stood with nothing but smoke behind him. And then he asked me something that surprised me. "Do you hate me?" I didn't know how to answer that. Not at first, because hatred is too easy. Hatred is something you feel toward someone who means nothing. But Greg was my son, and that complicated everything. "No," I finally said. "But I don't trust you, and I don't think I ever will again." He nodded like he expected that. Then he stood up and said something that caught me completely off guard. "I'm sorry." It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't come with tears or shaking hands. It was quiet, almost too quiet, like it was meant more for him than for me. And then he walked out. I haven't seen him since. Lisa never came back. She didn't call. She didn't write. The DA filed formal charges for financial elder abuse and fraud. Their assets are under audit. They might lose the house. They'll likely face court-mandated restitution and community service, maybe even jail time. But that's not the part I think about. What I think about is how easily they discarded me, how they treated my silence as permission, how they mistook my grief for weakness, how they thought age stripped me of worth. They were wrong. I may be old, but I am not disposable. I may be grieving, but I am not broken. And I may have been abandoned, but I am not alone. The days pass more slowly now. I still sit by the window every morning. The leaves outside are starting to turn again. Reds, oranges, browns. The color of endings. The color of change. I write letters to Linda, even though I know she'll never read them. Or maybe she will. Maybe the breeze that touches my cheek is her way of answering. The nursing home has become less of a cage and more of a porch, a place I rest before I move on. I play chess with a retired teacher named Paul. I laugh with Denise. I help younger residents with their crossword puzzles. I even read bedtime stories to a man with dementia who thinks I'm his brother. He calls me Harold. I don't correct him. Life continues, and so do I. But make no mistake, what Greg and Lisa didn't fade with time. It changed me. It taught me. And maybe, just maybe, it saved me from a darker kind of loneliness. The kind where you live among people who smile at you while plotting your disappearance. No, I'm not angry anymore. Not really. I'm awake. I'm aware. I didn't expect to live this long. That's the truth. Not after Linda passed. Not after Greg turned cold. Not after they signed me away like an unwanted relic. But sometimes, life has its own sense of humor. It lets you live not because you want to, but because there's still something left for you to see, to say, to do. Some mornings, I'd wake up thinking I was back in my old house, expecting to hear Linda humming in the kitchen, smell the burnt toast she always insisted wasn't burnt, hear the floor creak where Greg used to sneak in after curfew. But then I'd open my eyes and see the beige walls, the little call button on my chest, the quiet shuffle of nurses in the hallway. Reality never waits long to remind you where you really are. Still, I found strange comfort in routine. The wheelchair doesn't bother me like it used to. I've learned how to make it an extension of myself. It glides quietly now, almost like my shadow. Denise calls me the General because I patrol the halls like I own the place. Sure, maybe I do. Not with papers or deeds, but with presence, with memory, with the sheer force of having survived it all. People come to me now. They ask for advice. They sit beside me during storms. They bring me coffee, not because they have to, but because they want to. In this small corner of the world, I've become something I never thought I'd be again. Needed. One evening, I got a visit from Jenny again. She brought with her a box, tied with a red ribbon, the kind Linda used to wrap around pies. She placed it gently on my lap and said, "It's from the first scholarship recipient." Inside was a letter. A young woman named Martha, 62 years old, widowed, living in a trailer with a broken water heater. She used the Linda May grant to take online bookkeeping courses. She was now working part-time for a local business and saving to move into a senior co-op. At the end of her letter, she wrote, "Your wife's name gave me a new life. I carry it with pride." I cried, not just for Martha, not just for Linda, but because something broken had led to something whole. The pain Greg and Lisa caused, unforgivable, yes, but out of that cracked ground, something good had grown. It doesn't undo what they did, nothing ever will, but it means the story didn't end with betrayal. It continued with purpose. The case against Greg and Lisa dragged on, as these things do. Depositions, hearings, paper trails. Their faces occasionally popped up in local papers, but with fewer smiles and more shadows under their eyes. I didn't attend the hearings. I didn't need to. Justice, to me, was no longer about courtrooms or judgments. It was about boundaries. It was about reclaiming what they tried to erase. They can carry the weight of their choices. I've put mine down. One quiet Sunday, I received a letter, not from Greg, but from a lawyer. Inside was a simple message. Greg and Lisa had accepted a plea deal. They would forfeit their claim to my estate, complete 400 hours of community service, and attend mandatory courses on elder abuse awareness. They also issued a formal apology, typed out, signed, and notarized. I never opened it. Denise asked why, and I said, because it wasn't written from the heart. It was written to avoid a jail cell. Still, knowing they had to stand in front of a judge and admit what they did, that was enough. The staff at the nursing home threw me a small party the day the settlement was finalized. Jenny came, as did Martha. She wore a flower in her hair and brought me a card she'd hand-painted with watercolor. In it, she wrote, "Thank you for being the bridge." I don't think she knew how much that meant. All my life, I'd been building things. Sheds, benches, fences, homes. But at the end of it all, what mattered most was the bridge I didn't even know I was building. A path from betrayal to healing, from silence to story, from being thrown away to standing tall. I started writing more after that. Not letters to Linda, though I still do that too, but reflections, lessons, memories. I filled journals, one after the other, and when I was done, I asked Jenny to keep them safe, to publish them one day if she thought they could help someone else, because if there's anything I've learned in these final years, it's this. Growing old doesn't make you invisible. Being betrayed doesn't make you worthless. And being thrown away doesn't mean you're done. It just means you're being given a new kind of audience, one that's ready to listen, one that sees what others ignored. I see it in the way the young janitor asks me about stocks, in the way the night nurse confides in me about her sick father, in the way Denise sits beside me even after her shift ends, because she says I remind her of the grandfather she lost too soon. People don't just need wisdom, they need presence, proof that survival is possible. And here I am. Some nights, I still dream of the house, of the driveway I paved by hand, of the tree where Greg scraped his knee learning to ride his bike, of Linda's favorite chair, worn and sunken, but full of memory. I don't hate Greg anymore. I don't forgive him either. I've simply outlived the need to carry his damage. He has to carry that now. And Lisa, too. And maybe one day, if they're lucky, they'll look at their own reflection and finally understand what they lost. Not just the house, not just the money. They lost me. They lost the father who would have given everything just to see them happy. And that's a loss no court can restore. Now, as I sit by the window for what might be one of my last autumns, I feel something I didn't expect. Peace. Not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind that comes from seeing it all and still choosing to be whole. When the wind blows just right, I swear I hear Linda's laugh carried on the air. I smile, close my eyes, and whisper back, I'm still here. I didn't let them bury me. Because even though my name was stolen, my dignity bruised, and my story nearly erased, I took it all back, and I made sure the last chapter was mine. Theirs was written in deceit. Mine ends in dignity, and I wouldn't trade that for the world.